Welcome back to the Lagoon of Mystery for another moment of Tiki. One significant component of Tiki culture, Tiki bars, Tiki lounges, Tiki anything, is the artwork. Practitioners and fans of the genre collect art and display the art that they collect in their Tiki rooms. My wife and I are no different, although we don't have quite as large or extensive a collection as many of the people that we've encountered. During the previous Texas Tiki Week in Austin this past fall, my wife and I did pick out this Tony Canepa print, which is colorful and playful and, fits the aesthetic of our room, the ambiance that we're trying to create. Now, to display a piece of Tiki artwork in a Tiki room, one needs to have a Tiki frame to go with it. You can't just go down to Walmart and pick up any old frame unless they had Tiki frames, which they don't. Unfortunately, no one really has Tiki frames. So it is incumbent upon me to design and build a frame for which to display said artwork. Now, I've done several different frames and designs and styles over the past year or so, kind of trial and error. One of the bad habits I have is that I over-engineer things a lot. One frame I came up with ended up weighing about 20 pounds, and to hang it on the wall, kind of have to reinforce the hanger to stay with. I mean, you could drop a bomb on it and it would probably survive better than the rest of the house. That's not recommended, it's overkill. But I have refined my process and have come up with some designs that I like, that work for me. And I'm going to share with you how I go about making custom frames for my Tiki artwork. And hopefully you'll be able to take some inspiration and maybe learn a few things to apply it to your own Tiki art collection. Whenever I am starting a project, I always look around my garage, my shed, and see if I have any scrap material that I can use to complete the project, therefore saving money. This time I did not have any plywood available. Sad to say, I've had lots of plywood before, used it in previous frame projects. This time I didn't, so I went and got some 1/4-inch pine plywood from the local big box. It was really cheap. It's like $7. This isn't a full sheet. That would have been a better deal, but I didn't need that much. So this is what I got. It's like 4 foot by 2 foot, which should be more than adequate, and saved a few dollars. So when you pick out plywood, it doesn't have to be really good quality. Actually, the cheapest you can find. You just want some plywood that is not terribly warped, twisted, anything like that. You want it to be as flat as possible. Since I've gotten this home, it's been very humid, and so it started to cup a little bit, but it's not terribly bad. Once I'm finished, that cup will straighten out, and I think we'll be in good shape. So for the frame, the first thing we need to do after we have the plywood is to measure the dimensions of the artwork that we are going to frame. In this case, Tony's piece is 13 by 9.5. So what we do is pretty straightforward. We are going to measure this out on the plywood we have. So 9.5 and 13. In my experience, with the frames in particular, it's always better to cut your board slightly larger than slightly smaller. If it's too big, you can always shave a little off, but if it's too small, you can't put it back. So I use the straight edge T-square. I'm getting older as dirt, old as dirt. So a lot of the tools that I work with, I've accumulated over my many decades of life. Table saw was my grandfather's. Not even sure where this T-square came from. I didn't buy it, but it just showed up at my house one day. So don't despair. You can substitute, a circle saw works just as good as a table saw. Straight edge ruler, just make the marks along the length and do that, so you don't need this. It just makes it a little easier sometimes, but it's pretty straightforward regardless. So once we have the cut marks laid down, then we're going to set up the table saw to make the cuts. Now I've got my table set up, I've got my wood marked, I've got my rip fence here set up for the proper distance between the blade, so my cut's going to be the right size. I've got my safety glasses on in case there's any debris kicked up from the saw. I don't have an outfeed table on my saw, but I have the outfeed roller to catch it so it doesn't flip over. And when you're being careful with this is an older saw. It doesn't have a blade guard on it. It doesn't have a saw stop, any of the fancier stuff. So you need to be very, very careful around the spinning blade. With that in mind, be safe, be aware. If you have hearing issues, you can use earplugs, and just always be careful. It's easier to replace a ruined piece of wood than a ruined appendage. Now I've reset the rip fence to match the next proper distance, and we're going to make our second cut. Now what we have here is the backing board that perfectly fits the artwork to be displayed. Now the next step in creating the frame is going to take these is 1.5 inches by 1 inch, not quite, but I'm going to cut a strip of 1/2 inch all the way down the length of that, and that is going to form a box frame on the back of this, 1/2 inch thick all the way around. Now we have our 1/2 inch box frame material, and we're going to measure the dimensions and cut these to go along the back to frame it. If you'd noticed any of this light smoke coming out from my table saw as I was sawing, that's a sign that there's a buildup on my saw blade, and it needs to be cleaned because it's not cutting very efficiently. It's getting more friction than ideal, and causing some smoke, a little bit of burning on the wood cuts. So here we have the backing board, and I'm measuring out, just to be sure, the length, and that's 13 1/8 and 13 1/8. I'm going to cut the longer sides first. So I have my miter saw set up, and I'm going to use it to cut the frame pieces. Now we have the back box frame in position, it is time to attach it. At this point, I remind you of how I said earlier that I have a bad habit of over-engineering things. Well, I'm about to over-engineer this. I'm sorry, it's force of habit. It's in my nature, can't be helped. I line pieces up, and I'm going to take the drill and drill into pilot holes. Okay. Now that this is accomplished, I'm going to take Titebond 2, which is a quality wood glue, and I am going to slather a reasonable amount on here. I'm going to take this and line it up into position. There's galvanized roofing nails. You can use short paneling nails, which I would have if I had any that's short enough. These are 7/8 of an inch long. The other shortest I have is 1 inch, and that's a little bit too long for this box frame. There and here. Before we can make the outer frame that's going to go on here, we have to cut a piece of glass, or in this case plexiglass, to fit on the inner frame. So get your piece of plexiglass, lay it flat, and then take your box frame that we made that's going to support your art print, and just trace the outline on there. Now, plexiglass, when you buy it, comes with the protective film on either side. I just leave that protective film on. That way you can draw and mark on it without worrying that you're going to do anything that shows up and messes things up in the future. Once we have the outline marked, you want to move the plexiglass to the edge of a workspace, just a flat work surface. This doesn't have to be fancy. And you're going to line up a straight edge along the longest section of your cut. Now, this section that we need only goes to here, but when you're working with plexiglass, it's easiest to make a cut all the way across the body of the plexiglass you're working with. So I'm using a metal straight edge. I found that works the best, better than plastic or wood or what have you, but you know, you work with what you have available. And I'm clamping it down on either side. I'm clamping it to the wooden work surface and also clamping the metal on the plexiglass. We want this really tight. Because we're going to be putting pressure on here and don't want it slipping and sliding. Now this is a plexiglass cutting tool. It's a very simple blade. You're not going to cut through all the way. You're going to make multiple little cuts, and you're just going to work your way down to the point where the plexiglass can come apart. I'm cutting on the outside. My cut starting from this end. And I'm cutting outside. This is the part that I'm going to use over here, so I have my straight edge along there, so if I do slip or gouge out the plexiglass in any direction, it's going to be protected by the metal straight edge and go away from it. So the plexiglass that's going to be covering my artwork won't be marred or damaged. And you can see when you're dragging the cutting tool across the plexiglass, it's going to pull up little threads, shavings. This is a good sign. This is what you want. Now the idea is to not cut all the way through, but to cut enough to weaken the plexiglass that you have so that you can do this. Line up the scored edge with the edge of your workspace and just apply pressure abruptly downward. And you have the first part of your plexiglass cut. Now we are going to measure for the outer box. The reason we had to do this stage after cutting the plexiglass cover is that the plexiglass, although thin, adds a significant depth to your box. And what we're going to do is cut it so the outer box is flush with the inner box with the plexiglass on top. Now, the print that you're going to add here in between the plexiglass and the box is obviously going to increase the depth a little bit, but when you're talking about paper thin, that's a fraction of a millimeter. So the effect of that is making the fit snug as opposed to making the fit not fit. So what we're going to do is take the board you're going to work with, that you're going to cut the outer box from, line it up, and just draw the mark on. And there we go, that's all there is to it. You could take a ruler and measure that and go from there, but I don't know, numbers and I don't get along as well as they should. We should, so I just mark the actual spot on the board. Now we have our outer box frame board cut, and slide it up here, and it's just about perfect. Now we need to figure out the length of the cuts, the length of each piece. I took two of the offcuts. Well, I took the offcut and cut two smaller segments of it. Now each one of these is the same width as the outer box frame piece. So I'm putting them on each side so I can judge where the outer box, how long each side needs to be. This needs to be there, and this is right here, and I'm going to once again mark it with a pencil. Now we'll cut two for the outside, and then we'll come back and we'll measure. Well, the inside needs to be the same length as the short side of this, so that I could probably measure. The thing is, with the outer box, you don't want it to be super snug. So basically I'm saying when we're fitting it together, you'll see, but I'm going to make sure that there's a little bit of leeway so there's some slight movement possible. I don't want it to be loose in there, but I want it to be easily extractable. Once all of the outer box pieces are cut, it's time to start putting this together. The long pieces on the long sides, short pieces on the short side. Once they're there, you're going to want to make pilot holes in the sides, so we can nail the long piece to the short piece. With the pieces all in place, it's time for the glue up. I like to start by taking one of the nails. These are 1 5/8 inch nails. Working it into the pilot hole until it's just penetrating the other side. That makes it easier to line up with the pilot hole on the other side. So I'm going to take Titebond glue, Titebond 2, which is a strong wood glue. Not as strong as Titebond 3, but these aren't going outside, so we don't need that much water resistance. Getting the frame in there. A little nail tap. Get it flush. Wipe the squeeze out with paper towel.
We need to add retaining pieces to the front of the frame. I had some 1/8 inch thick scrap offcuts from a previous project that were perfect for this. I first sliced them into 1.5 inch wide strips, then cut each strip to length.
With the outer box completely assembled, it should slip right over your inner box, your inner frame easily. It shouldn't be terribly loose, but there should be a little bit of give in there so it's not going to seize up with wood movement. Next, take your retaining pieces, which you cut earlier, and position them along the outer box. We are going to do essentially the same thing we did previously. We're going to take the drill, we're going to drill pilot holes, one in the center, one on each end. On these end pieces, I like to drill so that one is on the short horizontal piece, and then the other two are connecting to the vertical pieces. Again, take the Titebond, before this next step, we might want to take this off so the glue squeeze out doesn't contaminate the inner frame. Place this into position. And for this, I'm using 1 inch paneling nails. As you can see right here, they will not penetrate all the way. Were we to use the 1 5/8 inch paneling nails, they're more than 1/2 inch deeper, so they're no bueno. But for this, it's just about the perfect size. These particular paneling nails are cherry color, cherry wood. That doesn't matter. You can use black, you can use white, you can use gray, you can use silver. They will not be visible once we're finished. With the glue up of the outer and the inner frame complete, it's now time to stain the wood. You want to move the plexiglass out of the way. Would not do to get that splattered. And this we are going to stain with, wait for it, Minwax Special Walnut, which is, yikes, pretty much my go-to. I found that for Tiki, it's an effective stain to use because it's dark. Not so dark that it's gummy like ebony or dark walnut, but it imparts a dark color to the wood. And that's what we want for this frame, because this wooden part, this box part, we don't want to attract visual attention. Time's up. Time to wipe them down. As I said in my first episode, bamboo is really prone to splitting. It just likes to splinter all over the place. So in order to reduce the possibility, likelihood of tear out, when I cut this, I've wrapped it with just a piece of blue tape and marked where my cut is. The tape will hopefully support the bamboo fibers on the back end, so when the saw blade gets there, we won't have a lot of shredding and splintering. Now I'm using my table saw for this, but the bamboo is such that you could use a miter saw, you can use a hand saw, you can use a coping saw. Pretty much any type of saw can cut this at this point. I'm just using this because it's convenient, and I'm also going to have to use my table saw for the next step. So, safety first. And that worked perfectly. There is no tear out. It's a nice, clean cut, which is exactly what I wanted. Traditionally, in the Philippines and elsewhere, bamboo, when it's needed to be split, is done so with a machete, a knife, and slice down the middle. Bamboo does have that propensity to split, and it will, cleave along that blade. I have never been able to successfully stay straight in the middle, so I always get my bamboo splitting off to the side, and it's awkward and ugly and doesn't work very well, and a lot of bamboo gets wasted. Therefore, I have moved to a table saw. This is a jig that I made. I did not come up with the concept myself. I saw it online. And it's just some scrap lumber that I put together with a 90-degree angle in the center to act as a cradle to guide the bamboo as I'm running it down the center of the saw blade. So I take my clip, my vice grips here, I clamp it on because we don't want this coming loose and flying into the saw blade while I'm cutting. Glass is ready, and I'm just going to feed this right down the middle of the jig. To attach the bamboo frame on our base frame, we position the pieces over the retaining piece, like so. If we measured everything properly, then we should have approximately an inch overhang on each side, and the bamboo half round that we cut should cover the slat. Now for this, we're going to use screws to attach the bamboo onto the frame itself. Make sure that your screw is long enough to go through the bamboo and penetrate the wood frame, but not so long as to go all the way through. Any type of screw will work. These are little brass bamboo screws, wood screws, but again, it's not really important what type of screw you use because they will not be visible in the final assembly. Now, we're going to line this up, so we're going to look and make sure that we have the bamboo where we're going to drill. It's going to go into the frame itself and not overshoot and get into the inner box. You want to use a drill bit that is almost as wide as the screw, but not quite, so the screw can grip into the wood. Hang on, let me move this over here so it's a little bit better supported. Okay. Now we're going to screw the screw in through the pilot hole that we've drilled. Now this is important. I don't want to exaggerate this or understate it. Do not countersink, do not over-screw, over-tighten the screw that's attaching the bamboo onto the wood. As I said, bamboo likes to split, and if we push this down more than just surface level with this, it will split the bamboo right along there. I've done it over and over again, and even though I know better, I still do it. So I don't want you to make the same mistake, especially if you don't have as readily access to bamboo as I do. Just when it gets to the surface, stop. To attach the cross pieces, you've got to pull out our drill, or if you're a hand tool, use your screwdriver. And we're going to loosen the screws that we just attached. Just a little bit though. Just enough to make some space underneath so that we can slide jute twine. I have found that using the jute twine, the length varies depending on how wide and thick your bamboo pieces are, your bamboo half rounds. 3 feet, 36 inches, a meter, that's a good length to start with. And if it proves to be too short, well, you'll just have to start over and cut a longer slice. If it's too long, that's not a problem because all you have to do is just cut it to length once you've tied it off. So you want to get it an even amount, thusly, then tighten the screw back down. Again, taking care not to over tighten, whereas the screw will just press and countersink into soft wood, and the hard, brittle bamboo, it will split. And we do the same thing on the opposite side. Don't necessarily have to, it's just easier to do both at once. Even it out, then tighten back down. Now take your bamboo crosspiece half round, position it where you want, and at this point we're just doing straightforward lashings. Crisscross applesauce, as they say. You want to make it tight and cross over again. And once you've got as many cross lashings as your particular aesthetic prefers, tie it off underneath the backside here with a square knot or other knot of your preference. Pull it tight, and then using a knife or scissors, just cut off any excess twine. And repeat the exact same process on the other side. Now it's time to put the finishing touches on here that make the frame functional. This involves a hanger system, which are 2 eye hooks that go into the outer frame so we can run a braided wire through it and hang it to the wall, and turn buttons. Turn buttons are just a small piece of metal that pivot on a screw. We install these in the outer part of the frame, outer frame, and it holds the inner frame in place. So I take drill with a very small bit for the eye. For the turn buttons, position this. Again, using the small drill bit. Take the braided hanging wire and give it a loop here, twist on. And there we go. And now the moment you've all been waiting for. Plexiglass that we cut earlier. Slide right in there. Tony Canepa artwork. Slide right in there. Now to close it up. And this is not going flush. The cardstock backing that came with the packaging for the artwork is very thin, but our measurements were precise enough so that the cardstock was enough to throw it off. So, remove the cardstock and, yes, perfect. Perfect fit. Drum roll, please. Ta-da! And there you have it, a Tiki frame for Tiki artwork for display in the Tiki room. It's crude, it's cumbersome, it's primitive. In other words, pretty much everything you would want for display in a Tiki atmosphere. There are other ways to build frames. There are proper ways to build frames, none of which or incorporated with this one, feel free to experiment. Feel free to try your own thing. Feel free to work with all sorts of different designs to come up with something that suits your particular expression. But for me, I found that this, utilizing mostly scrap materials or low-cost materials that can be found, constructed yourself, offcuts, scrap wood, leftover pieces after other projects, works for me. With the jute twine, you can also go over it with a light coating of amber shellac, which gives it a nice patina. If the bamboo ever starts to fade, if it's near a window or anything, amber shellac will kind of liven it up again. But right here, you've got a low cost, high impact frame for displaying your artwork, and I hope it inspires you to go out and try some of your own. Until next time, aloha.